Hello and welcome back to the series of lectures on floriculture. We have last time talked about how to actually cultivate plants in the pots and maintain these pots for as long as one desires. Today we'll talk about specific plants, its basic habit, its habitat, and the methods of its cultivation. The plant that we have selected for today's lecture is popularly known as geranium, but actually botanically it is pelargonium. Historically, this is an ornamental plant which has been in usage for roughly about 500 years. And its center of origin, or the place where it was first of all tried to be domesticated and ornamentally cultivated, was in Africa. But from Africa, its introduction into Europe is considered to be the background as to how its ornamental value, its cultivation practices, as well as the method of its cultivation has been modified as well as sustained for different conditions of habitat as well as climate. It is said that an English botanist popularly known as Tradescant, after whom a plant Tradescantia has been named, was the person who introduced it from Africa into England. And in England, during its domestication, they were able to identify different requirements as to where, how, and under which conditions it can be cultivated. The plant is ordinarily cultivated in pots. This is primarily because this has a potential to remain evergreen and usually survive for longer durations. That is, it's a perennial plant which sometimes attains a bushy or even a shrubby habit. Generally, this plant, if allowed to grow in nature as such, that means a wild plant in the wild habitats, it can actually get converted into a shrub-like structure. However, under domesticated conditions, that is, where we cultivate this plant as an ornamental, in those conditions, its structure, its production, its quality, its ornamental value, as well as whatever variations it shows, has tremendous ornamental as well as commercial value. As you can see, this plant shows not only variation in color of the flowers, again you can see, but also variation in different foliage structures as well as branching pattern, as well as in terms of the size it attains and the structural variation it shows. It is said that originally its concept was to be cultivated as a land perennial. That means it was planted in beds, and in those beds it was maintained for as long as one desires. However, if the climatic conditions was harmful, that means when either during winter the condition was extremely cold or during summer the conditions were extremely hot, in those conditions it was seen that there was a negative effect, a drastic effect on its survival as well as quality production. It is said that during 18th and 19th century, this plant was tried to be domesticated and cultivated in pots, as again you can see, and within these pots, this plant actually not only survives for as long as one desires, but also is used for decorating not exterior parts, that means the garden, lawns, etc., but also sometimes can be used for decorating the interiors of a home or some ornamental park. It has been seen that during its cultivation, primarily two things play a vital role. One, as to where we maintain it, and second, what practices we follow for its cultivation. Generally, irrespective of its usage, there are two methods of its propagation. That means either we can propagate it by using the seeds. Again, you can see we collect the seeds, try to sow these seeds so that these seeds in turn can give rise to a seedling, and that seedling in turn can be used for decorating the pots or being cultivated as an ornamental. However, the time taken by a seed to first of all produce a seedling is estimated to be from 30 to 60 days, and then this seedling reaching a height of ornamental production takes about 2 to 3 years. On the other hand, if we use vegetative propagation methods, that is, wherein we use cuttings, again you can see, selecting different branches and trying to cut them into smaller segments, and each segment in turn being planted in a specific pot for propagation purposes, that has been seen to overcome whatever deficiency in the rate of production as well as the quality of the production is. It has been seen that if we use the seeds, the basic method is to collect the seeds in the autumn, That means when the flowers show signs of senescence, collect them, store them during the winter months, and then in the spring, especially in temperate areas or even in tropical areas, we try to sow these seeds in the month of either April or sometimes even in May. And these seeds essentially are to be sown in a soil wherein the soil texture is usually sandy and some part of soil has been added to it. And these seeds are sown roughly about 1.5 to 1.75 centimeters below the soil. Again, you can see how the seeds are sown. And then these soils are actually irrigated at the time of sowing, and this irrigation is monitored till the seedlings show a pattern of proper development and then reaching a stage of transplantation. But if we try to use vegetative methods, that means wherein we try to take cuttings of these plants and then use that cutting as a method or medium of propagation, in that case, the selection of the branchlet or a branch that is to be used for propagation is dependent upon what the age of the plant is. Ordinarily, again you can see, we do not use green branchlets. That means when they are young, immature or semi-mature. But if we use these cuttings for propagation, their survival pattern is hampered. On the other hand, if we use mature branches, again you can see a mature branch which shows hardness of texture. At that stage, we have to see that this particular branchlet has a vegetative bud towards its apical portion. That means towards the tips we have the vegetative buds. That means showing the development of the foliage or the leaves from that branch. This branchlet is cut out from the donor, that means the plant, and then these in turn are planted into either a nursery or even a pot wherein the soil texture as well as soil composition is the same as we use for the seeds. Again, you can see here. Now, in this case, two things are important. That is, the distance between the cuttings should be properly designed. That means the two seedlings, the two cuttings that will develop ultimately should not in any way hamper the development of each other, and the depth of this basal part of the shoot should not be deeper than 2 to 2.5 centimeters. That means we cannot actually sow it deeper, which in turn has been seen to prove harmful to the cutting survival. After these cuttings have been planted, this soil is irrigated so that the soil gets compactly packed around the cuttings. Again, you can see here, we add smaller quantities of water, and then immediately after addition of water, we try to see that each cutting actually remains erect. Again, you can see here. That means the efficiency is dependent upon the method that we use. Each gardener, whosoever practices these, tries to monitor these cuttings for roughly about 2 to 3 weeks so that their basic structure as well as the position remains the same. That means they should not get lodged towards any side, and during their survival pattern, one should monitor whether new vegetation, that means the foliage or the vegetative buds, start developing. Now, if the foliage starts developing or the buds start appearing, that automatically shows that this cutting actually is now in a position to give rise to a new plant. Now, once this cutting has shown the vegetative development, we have to regularly monitor the need not only of the moisture but also, if a need arises, of the fertilizers that are to be added. That means if the propagation has been carried out in the month of April or May, right up to the end of the growing season, that is either September or October, we have to regularly monitor the soil as well as the habitat as well as the plant, so that this in turn reflects as to how much efforts have been made are actually succeeding. Now, at this stage, the plant as such, that means the vegetatively propagated plant as such, can be transferred or transplanted into a new pot, or can be maintained in the same nursery or in that same propagation medium during the winter, so that in the next spring we will transplant them into pots. Now, at this stage, two things again are important. The first important parameter is that when we want to transplant them from the propagating medium to the pot, at that stage we have to see that the pot that is needed or used is actually well prepared. That means the soil that has been added is properly comprising of two different components, and within that soil, if a need arises, some sand, some organic nutrients and some inorganic nutrients are added. Now, here one thing is important. as to how much of the quantity of the inorganic or organic nutrients are to be added. Ordinarily, if we add organic nutrients, in that case they should be completely mixed with the soil. Again, you can see manually mixed with the soil. At that stage, it reflects that the soil is comprising not only the basic material but also has in it organism. Now, after this addition of organic nutrients, there may be a need to add inorganic nutrients. Now, inorganic nutrients means either urea or NPK. Now, in that case, the method of addition and the quantity that is to be added is actually dependent on the side of the seedling. Now, if we have a seedling up to say 12 inches tall or sometimes even taller than that, in that case, usually at the time of sowing, we add 1 teaspoonful of either urea or NPK to the soil surrounding the root, not directly to the root but soil surrounding the root, as you can see again, which means that we are providing the pot not only organic nutrients but also inorganic nutrients, which in turn actually not only facilitate the development of the plant but also regularize its survival. Now, at this stage, addition of water or irrigation is essential, because if water is not added, adaptability of the plant from the nursery or from the propagation medium to the ornamental pot is getting hampered. That means at transplantation stage, with the addition of nutrients as well as organic nutrients, we have to add water also. Now, at this stage, this pot initially is to be maintained under shady conditions with partial sunlight. The reason for this is that if it is directly exposed to sunlight, the seedling survival or the survival of the transplanted plants is getting hampered because of the excessiveness or hotness of the temperature, and in turn also because of the evaporation of the water and nutrients added. Now, once the plant after this transplantation shows different structural features, that means leaf as well as the branchlets or branches show adaptability pattern, that reveals that the transplanted seedling is actually now useful for ornamental purposes. Now, at this stage, again you can see these plant as such or the pots as such can be used for decorative purposes. Now, it means that roughly for vegetative propagation or seed propagation, it initially takes 1 full year to develop a plant for ornamental purposes. Now, at this stage, this ornamental plant can be used for decorating whatever area we want it, and after decoration, this is to be regularly monitored. Now, here, 2 things are important for this pelargonium, and that is, now if we want to cultivate it in tropical conditions, that means, say in those areas where the temperatures are more than 35 or sometimes even touching 40-45 degrees Celsius. In that case, it is in need of to be kept under shady conditions and continuously irrigated during summer. However, if we try to cultivate it under temperate areas, even in those areas, one fundamental requirement is to actually keep it for decorative purposes under partially shady conditions or sometimes even in complete shady conditions. It means that this plant actually has a basic quality or adaptability wherein shade and proper temperature maintenance is essential. Now, during summers, it has been seen that one has to regularly monitor its irrigation. Whenever the soil around the basal part of the plant gets dry, the gardeners try to irrigate it, and that irrigation in turn has been seen to facilitate not only the survival of the plant but also facilitate the productive potential. Now, after this has been attained, as we see, we have so many variations, not only in flower color, but in foliage shape, foliage size, as well as the pattern in which the plant exists. This means that there are different variations and varieties within the plant. Ordinarily, this pelargonium, or sometimes as I told you commonly known as geranium, is considered to be one single ornamental plant, but botanically, so far around 200 different species have been identified, which show variation not only in the ornamental value but also in terms of shapes, structures, colors, sizes of both foliage as well as the flowers. Now, again you can see we have so much of variation in size, shape, color of these different pelargoniums. However, It has been seen that if we want to cultivate it for different purpose, that means to be used for decorative purposes in sunny conditions, decorative purposes in shady conditions, decorative purposes for drooping or looping purposes, in that case, the different species in turn help us to identify within this genus different cultivars or different varieties. Generally, 4 main types have been identified. Among these, the one is known as common German geranium or common garden geranium. This garden geranium is a plant which can survive almost anywhere and everywhere. Its ornamental value in terms of the flower size and coloration is not as good as in the other plants. The second is known as Regal Geranium. Regal Geranium is the one in which we show tremendous variation in the flower color as well as the leaf color as in size. You can see again, that means the flower as well as foliage also play a vital role in depicting its ornamental value. The third one is what is referred to as trailing geranium. Trailing actually means one which can actually droop down or hang from a pot. Again, you can see a pot wherein the branchlets are drooping down from top of the pot towards the basal portion. Such pots are used for hanging decorative purposes. That means wherein the branchlets or sometimes even the whole branch are drooping down from the branch, from the plant itself, and in that drooping branch we have the foliage as well as the flowers depicting their ornamental value. That means in this case the size of the plant does not in any way get hampered because the height at which it is kept for growing, that in turn is necessitating or facilitating its survival pattern. The fourth geranium, that is the most important commercially as well as ornamentally, is what is referred to as scented geranium or scented pelargonium. Now this is a plant in which not only the plant as a whole but flowers and foliage, again you can see here this plant wherein the flowers as well as foliage have in them a tremendous aroma. That means it does not have only ornamental value but it also has an aromatic value. Some people cultivate this plant for, first of all, ornamental purposes, but ultimately at the end of the growing season they harvest its foliage or branchlets or even flowers, try to extract aromatic substances from them and then use them for the manufacture of perfumes and other products. That means this plant itself has ornamental as well as the aromatic value. Now in all these plants, it has been seen that there are 2 basic requirements for their maintenance. One, that they should be regularly monitored throughout the growing season so that their survival pattern as well as ornamental quality remains consistently same. Now in this case, again you can see as soon as the flower shows a sign of senescence. Senescence means where it shows the step towards its dryness. At that stage, commercial cultivators or decorative cultivators try to immediately cut off these flowers. Again you can see they cut off these flowers because cutting of these flowers actually is facilitating production of newer and newer flowers in the same plant. Now imagine, one flower is cut off, next may appear, again that is cut off, next may appear. That automatically means we are trying to facilitate the production of the flowers not for a shorter duration but for a longer duration, so that right from the day flowering starts up to the day plant shows signs of senescence, it is continuously producing the flowers for ornamental purposes. Second important requirement is that if there is any sign of senescence on the foliage, that is not on the flowers but on the leaves itself, again you can see in that case it has been seen that one has to actually manually, that is by using its own hand, try to cut off these leaves. Again you can see here, so that these leaf cutting in turn facilitates not only survival of the plant but also whatever ornamental value these foliages or these leaves have in the plant. That means the cutting of flowers which show signs of senescence as well as cutting of foliage which show signs of senescence in turn not only improves the decorative value of these but also facilitates their survival for longer durations. Now this pattern is practiced not only by commercial cultivators but also by those who try to actually cultivate them only for ornamental purposes. Then at the end of each growing season, there are signs that some of the plants or some of these pots in which we cultivate them show signs which in turn may prove harmful to the plant itself or harmful to the flowers or sometimes even the foliage. That means perhaps due to overstorage or due to prolonged cultivation, the pot does not have a potential to sustain the plant as such for longer periods. In this case, what is done is that we try to dig this plant out of the pot. Again, you can see here, the pot has been opened up, flower plant as such got out, and this plant actually shows excessive or the larger development of the roots. Again, you can see here, it has been seen that if the roots actually start touching the border of the pot, that means touching the peripheral portion of the pot, that touch in turn is proving drastically negative to the survival of the plant itself. That means the root, even though important part of the plant, but if it is larger in size, that larger size of the root is drastically affecting the survival as well as the quality of the production. In this case, usually these plants are dug out, that means they are cut out from the pot, and then whatever excessive root growth development has taken place, they are actually cut off. That means we are trying to cut off excessive development so that the roots do not in any way touch the peripheral portion of the pot. It is essential because the peripheral portion of the pot sometimes, if directly exposed to sunny conditions or hot conditions or sometimes even cold conditions, can drastically affect the survival pattern. That means here the cutting of the roots or bringing the plant out of the pot in turn is directly responsible for facilitating the prolonged survival of these plants. Now that means the monitoring of the pots in turn will help us not only to maintain them but also to actually maintain whatever productive quality or whatever color as well as variation they show. Now usually some cases these roots or cuttings that have been taken have been seen to survive if they are thrown away into what is commonly referred to as rubbish heap. That means wherever we throw out this waste from the pot. Now that means this may also act as a method or a medium by which even the root cuttings can be used for propagation through vegetative means. It means that if there is excessive development of the root, this root cutting in turn can be resown in a pot or in the substratum in the botanical garden or in the garden as such. In that garden, this root cutting will in turn help us vegetatively to propagate it. It means that during the cutting of the roots, we may also be able to produce a new plant from that wastage that has been thrown away by the commercial cultivators or by the domestic cultivators. It means that during the propagation or during the harvesting or during the retransplantation of these, we may sometimes even get those plants or those plant parts which may have been thought to be useless to the cultivators or to the commercial growers. Another important aspect of these pots maintenance is that should we add fertilizers continuously through the growing season, or there should be a regular method or the regular period at which they are to be added. Ordinarily, in order to facilitate commercial survival, that means where we are using them as commercial ornamentals, in that case, an addition of a nutrient, either organic or inorganic, is to be carried out usually at intervals of roughly from 15 to 20 days depending upon what sort of conditions it is exposed. Now if we are talking about temperate conditions, that means areas like say northern parts of India like Kashmir etc. In those areas we try to add fertilizers at periods of roughly about 15, sometimes even after 20 days. However, if we try to cultivate it in tropical areas, that means where the evaporative mechanism is much harsher, in those cases we try to add these nutrients usually at intervals of either 10 or sometimes at best after 15 days. That means we can maintain these pots as well as these ornamentals for as long as we want. But the primary requirement is that the methods as well as the techniques for selected plants of this Pelargonium, commonly known as geranium, should be maintained throughout this time or throughout the period for which we want to cultivate it as a commercial ornamental or as a domestic ornamental. One thing that I would like to add at the end is that whosoever wants to cultivate these, they should always try to maintain them during winter, that means during extremities of climate, indoors, that is in those areas where they do not get directly exposed to extremely cold climatic conditions. I hope that this method would be practiced by those who want to cultivate it as a domestic ornamental or as a commercial ornamental. Thank you.